Hi, my name is Daisha Taylor, and today I will be doing my country profile report on South Korea. So the topics I'll be highlighting are a little background about South Korea, the issues I chose were the suicide rates, their relationship with North Korea, racism and xenophobia in the country, and I'll talk about how globalization affects these issues, and my travel itinerary and budget. So a little background about South Korea is that it was a poor agricultural country after World War II, but using the Confucian work ethic, Japanese business model, and US aid, they were able to become an economic powerhouse. They currently have the fourth largest economy in Asia and the 11th largest economy in the world. The country, a little geography is the country consists of 30% lowland areas and the rest is divided into mountains and highland areas. And the lowland areas usually lie near the coast or a major river, like the Yongsan, Nakdong, or Hangyang. The religions practiced there, it's 26% Christian, 23% Buddhist, 49% don't practice religion, and 2% other foreign. So the suicide rates in South Korea are the highest in an OECD nation. It is actually the fourth leading cause of death, with about 40 people committing suicide every day. It is the only OECD nation where the suicide rates have increased after the 90s. And although suicide affects a very large range of ages and genders, the most vulnerable groups from studies are adolescents aged 10 to 19 and the elderly. So adolescents are mostly students, and the curriculum in South Korea is pretty difficult because they go to school for about 16 hours a day. That's regular school, and then they go right into cram school. And they're studying so they can get into a prestigious high school or a college. And a lot of those colleges and high schools have very low acceptance rates. Their families are also pressuring them to get into these places because a student's whatever academic institution accepts a student reflects upon the family reputation. So if they fail to live up to those expectations, or they can't even meet them at all, they feel like there's no point, so they take their lives. The elderly is affected because as the country has been modernizing, a lot of adult children are moving out of their parents' homes. They're not staying and taking care of them and going into the city and getting jobs. And sometimes they send money back, but a lot of times as this money starts to decrease and their elderly parents or relatives can't take care of themselves with the funds that they're given, they also don't get anything from the government because a pension system wasn't founded in South Korea until 1988. So they're living by themselves. They're not really seeing anyone. They're living in poverty, and they can't work because a lot of them are retired. So they see themselves as financial burdens, and they take their own lives so that they're not a burden to their family anymore. Some other reasons are there was actually an economic crash in 1997 that resulted in thousands of people being unemployed, which has led the South Korean society to be a high stress society because people don't want another crash to happen, so that's why they keep working long, hard hours despite it flourishing. And high stress work in school environments, as I've highlighted before, can lead to illnesses like depression and anxiety, but there's still a lot of negative stigmas attached to it in their society, and also seeking psychiatric help. So it's said by the South Korean National Welfare and Health Ministry that 90% of those who committed suicide in 2016 had a treatable mental illness, and only 15% of those sought out help. A lot of times they self-medicate, and they think that'll fix the problem, like going to religious gatherings or exercising or using social media. A lot of times they abuse alcohol because drinking alcohol is more socially acceptable than saying that you have a mental illness or saying that you're seeing someone for it. And alcohol actually contributes to about 40% of the suicides because a lot of people do it when they're drunk. And another reason is not enough money is spent on mental health care in the country. country. Only about $7 million was spent in 2016 for mental health care, and 64% of that went to hospitals and institutions, compared to Japan, which has a very similar problem, which spent $130 million. Another issue I highlighted was their relationship with North Korea. So the countries are still technically at war. They have two very different governments, with South Korea being a democratic republic and North Korea being a communist dictatorship. And there are still tensions between the two countries because of displays of aggression by North Korea. So in 1953, an armistice was signed, but that ended the fighting, but that didn't turn into a peace treaty, so they're still at war. The demilitarized zone is also very heavily equipped with weaponry because it is the border between the two countries. North Korea's government has allowed for a lot of human rights violations, which a lot of the world doesn't agree with, and makes it hard for South Korea to try and pursue peace agreements. And North Korea has actually still been trying to develop nuclear weapons and has been testing them very close to where South Korea is. Currently, the president of South Korea has been trying to reach some sort of peace treaty between the North by the end of this year, but we have yet to see how that will work out. So the final issue was South Korea more or less values Koreans above everyone else, and especially those who have very pale skin. About 2 million foreigners live in South Korea. And a survey that was done for those living in South Seoul found that 94.5% of them were discriminated against. And another reason for why this is because a lot of Koreans harbor sentiments from when they were occupied by other nations in the past, and it's transferred to discrimination. The government also had programs where they were more or less fostering racial purity to bring everyone together. So they were calling it blood purity, so if you had two parents that were Korean and more or less all of your lineage was Korean, then you'd be racially pure. But if you didn't, like if you had a non-Korean parent, then you'd have mixed blood, and it made you seem lesser than your peers. There are also no anti-discrimination laws for race and religion. There are laws for gender and age, but not for nationality or race. A lot of the laws haven't been passed because unionists are afraid of foreigners taking their jobs, and also the Christian community opposes them because a lot of times the race laws are coupled with anti-discrimination laws for the LGBTQ community. Also, the reasons for this are they were occupied by China, Japan, and the U.S. So China had a lot of political and cultural power in ancient Korea, and Japan tried complete cultural and political annexation of the nation for more or less 40 years, and the U.S. still has a very strong presence in South Korea. Other instances of xenophobia and racism in the country. There were Yemeni refugees who tried to find asylum in Jeju Island, and about 500,000 people protested them being there, and they were willing to leave. Because there's no anti-discrimination laws, the job scene is pretty difficult for foreigners because they require that you send a picture of yourself in with your application. So if you don't look what they consider to be bright, like with pale skin or Korean, then you can just easily be disqualified for the position just based on looks. Globalization. So with globalization, the South Korean government would have a better way to deal with the suicide problem, and they'd also know that mental illnesses aren't taboo, and they're not gonna, lower your social standing because everyone has what they're going through. Globalization would also help because if the North and South reunified, they'd have a really good economy, because when they were occupied by Japan had the North be industrial, while South was agricultural. And for these past 60 years, they haven't had access to each other. But if they did, then they could flourish economically. Also, with globalization, they have more exposure and perhaps residency of foreigners, and then that would change their views on them. Unfortunately, also with globalization, they do get Western media, and sometimes that isn't the correct depiction of certain cultures to South Korea. For my travel itinerary, I chose to travel in the summertime so I wouldn't have to pack as much for luggage. And I'd fly from JFK Airport in New York at 1:45, and then I'll go to Shanghai, China at 4:55 a.m. Which is a 5-hour layover. And then from that plane, I'd leave from Shanghai and get to Seoul at 11:55. I'd go stay at a hotel called Bobo Hotel, and they charge $95 a night per stay. And the currency in South Korea is won, and 1,000 won is equivalent to 0.9 US dollars. So transportation, you have taxis, buses, and subways, and you can buy these T-Money cards or T-cards, and that is the cheapest way for transportation because you can transfer funds from your account into those cards, and you can use it on subways or buses, but not really taxis. Taxis are the most expensive, and these buses are different. There's different colors of the buses, so you know that where they're going, downtown, metropolitan, tourist sites, and so on. Some traditional Korean dishes are kimchi, which is fermented cabbage. It's really spicy, and sometimes it's made with ginger, scallions, chili powder, or salted seafood. There's bulgogi, which is fire meat, and it's more or less marinated beef or pork. You can actually cook it yourself. If you go into traditional Korean restaurants, they have a little grill. You put the raw strips of meat on there. And japchae, which is sweet potatoes, stir-fried noodles. It's very pretty. It's seasoned with carrots, onions, and pepper mushrooms. So the local attractions that I would go to would be the Hangang or Han River, Jeju Island, and the demilitarized zone. So the Han River has a bunch of activities you can do. They have the Rainbow Fountain, which is a stream of water patterns that shoots out during the night, and there's LED lights so it looks like a rainbow. You have an abundance of parks and trails that you can ride bikes on or camp in. There's the graffiti tunnel that you can use to get to the Han River, and it changes because people go in there and put all the graffiti. Jeju Island has the tallest mountain in South Korea, Mount Hallasan, and that it's actually a dormant volcano, and you can see like crater lakes from the top of it. It's about a day to climb up and down. There's the Folk Village exhibit that they have in Jeju Island, and it shows how ancient Koreans in the 18th century lived with a bunch of different artifacts like clothes, food, pottery, housing. There's the Osulak Museum, which tells the history of tea and the traditions of tea in South Korea. And then there's Deep Diving Women, which is a group of women that fishes, and they can go up down to about 10 meters without any breathing masks and catch abalone, shellfish, urchins, sometimes octopi too. And also go to the demilitarized zone because that's the border. They have a few tours that they offer there. It's the border between the north and the south. And you can kind of see, just a glimpse of what North Korea looks like. Some of the buildings actually go over the border, but if you're in it, you cannot go outside of it because it's beyond the North Korean side. So my travel budget, a round trip plane ticket to South Korea is $918. Hotel stay for the week would be $570. Transportation is $250. Food is $300, and my estimated budget would be $2,038. And these are my citations, the same as I used in my report. So that was my presentation.